Times is reporting that President Trump's abrupt decision to withdraw troops from Syria affected the already existing plans for the raid on ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. According to intelligence, military, and counterterrorism officials, Mr. Trump's abrupt withdrawal order 3 weeks ago disrupted the meticulous planning underway and forced Pentagon officials to speed up the plan for the risky night raid before their ability to control troops, spies, and reconnaissance aircraft disappeared with the pullout, the officials said. Mr. al-Baghdadi's death in the raid on Saturday, they said, occurred largely in spite of and not because of Mr. Trump's actions. Joining our discussion now, Brett McGurk served in the national security positions under Presidents Bush, Obama, and Trump, and most recently as the envoy leading the global campaign to defeat ISIS. He is a senior foreign affairs analyst for MSNBC. Also joining us, Malcolm Nance, MSNBC counterterrorism and intelligence analyst. And Brett McGurk, your reaction to the Times reporting about this?
Well, it's quite an extraordinary report, and what strikes me is the fact that when President Trump had this call with President Erdogan, this fateful call on October 6th, I think quite clearly there was no process to really staff that call, to brief the president, so he fully understood the consequences if Erdogan had a green light to cross the border, because nobody was providing more intelligence on Baghdadi, and this isn't new. This has been going on for years now. The majority of the intelligence, frankly, has come from the Syrian Kurdish-led forces. And without those forces, our ability to really finish off the leadership of ISIS, in particular Baghdadi, who Trump said was his #1 priority, apparently he said that, we couldn't do that without these guys. And what's happened since then is all the Kurdish areas of Syria along the border, the vast majority of them, we've abandoned those areas, and they're now under the control of Russia and the Assad regime. So our ability to continue to prosecute this campaign, to follow up on the intelligence collected from the Baghdadi compound, which must be an extraordinary amount of information, is extremely limited. It's a total breakdown in process, and it speaks to issues going on now really across the board around the world.
So, Brett McGurk, what is the overall impact, you think, at this point of stopping al-Baghdadi?
Well, again, I want to say it is a landmark day. The men and women who pulled this off, the civil servants in the intelligence community, our men and women in the special forces. I spent a lot of time with them in Iraq and Syria. Truly extraordinary. And Baghdadi is not easily replaced. So we should not understate the achievement here. And President Trump, at the end of the day, he did order this very gutsy raid. You could have obliterated the compound from the air with jets and things. He ordered a raid across hundreds of miles of territory. That's risky. But now we've collected all of this intelligence. It's a treasure trove. I've worked on the ISIS account for many years. It's just unimaginable what we now have in our possession. And we want to follow up on that quickly and rapidly. But because of the chaos in northeast Syria over the last month, due to the decision that the president made on October 6th, this total unraveling of what was a very secure and stable situation, it'll be very difficult for us to follow through on this information. The guys working it will do the best they can, but it is a deeply unfortunate situation and an unforced error.
And Malcolm Nance, the president, when he was giving his thanks yesterday, the first country he thanked in this collaboration was Russia.
Well, that's one of those aspects of the Trump administration that is still a mystery to everyone. But as Brett McGurk said, it's the men and women of the armed forces who carried out this absolutely amazing piece of special operations activity and intelligence tradecraft that brought us to the point where we could take out Baghdadi. But for the most part, the fact that we actually were drawing down or had to plan to draw down all of these resources, and there's this elaborate ballet of intelligence resources on the ground with our allies, the Kurds, in the air, which any one of which, had they come out of sequence, would have tipped this activity off not just to the Russians, but to the Syrians and the Turks and people that we didn't want to have happen, didn't want to see and know that we were actually going to carry off this mission. But that the President of the United States would have to deconflict this mission anyway with the Russians in that immediate airspace because of the resources we put there. But to praise them first is extraordinary. I mean, that is just, something that is going to have to be left for the history books or for the impeachment process to vet out, because it certainly is not something that I think that the men and women who carried out this mission would have expected to, be at the top of their checklist.
Brett, what is the strength level of ISIS today?
In Iraq and Syria, there's probably above 10,000 fighters or so. They're dispersed. They're trying to regenerate in an insurgency. And again, this is the risk of withdrawing the bulk of our force in northeast Syria. And, we built this campaign to be very cost effective, very low numbers of U.S. forces, really no more than 2,000 at any given time. We're not fighting. We're not taking casualties. We're not spending that much money at all. And President Trump justifies the withdrawal of these forces by saying he ran on promise to bring the troops home. But he's actually sent 14,000 more U.S. forces to the Middle East since May. So there's so much incoherence here. And again, the ability to follow up on this operation has been significantly diminished. And without the Syrian Kurdish-led forces, we would not have gotten Baghdadi. Without the Syrian Kurdish-led forces, we have not have defeated the ISIS physical caliphate that Trump praises repeatedly. And again, the Kurdish areas in Syria are now under the control of Russia and the Assad regime, because President Putin and President Erdogan last week sat in a room in Sochi with a map of Syria and carved up all the territory that we had left. So that's what happened. And the situation is really not a good one, not to mention 180,000 people who have been displaced since October 6th, many of whom are heading to an already very unstable, very fragile Iraq and Iraqi Kurdistan region. So this is why you need a serious national security team, a very serious national security council to advise the president and make good decisions, and that's really not happening.
And Malcolm, in the president's statement yesterday, which was supposed to be 900 words, and he rambled it into 8,000, there was no evidence whatsoever that Donald Trump has any idea what happens next.
No, and that's the problem with the Trump administration. Incoherence is just the start of how you could describe this lack of policy. What's happening here is a series of decisions which are occurring in Donald Trump's mind. And from those immediate decisions which get put out in a tweet, then some policy has to be immediately drafted up on the back of a notebook and, some notepaper. And then as that's being executed, Trump changes his mind again. What we have here is incompetence. There is no policy in the Middle East. There are deals that are occurring that it appears that are happening that we don't know about, but we're seeing the parameters of them. And then we find out later on that one of them betrays the #1 ally of the most successful asymmetric warfare operation since the Jedburghs in World War II. So, whatever Donald Trump is doing here, we can only expect to see absolutely more mayhem. That's just about all I could say.
Brett McGurk, Malcolm Nance, thank you both for joining our discussion tonight. Really appreciate it.